Good day everyone, this is Joyce Anbore, your discussant for today, and today we are going to discuss taxation in Philippine history during Spanish period, Marcos administration, and Duterte administration. Taxes during the Spanish period was compulsory. All the Spanish colonies in America and the Philippines were required to pay taxes for two reasons. Number one, as recognition of Spain's sovereignty over the colonies. Number two, to defray the expenses of pacification, or the act of forcibly suppressing hostility within the colonies. During the tributo, sanctorium, donativo, caja de comunidad, and servicio personal. Tributo was a general tax paid by the Filipinos to Spain which amounted to 8 reales. Those who were required to pay the tributo are the 18 to 50 years old males, the carpenters, bricklayers, blacksmiths, tailors, and shoemakers. Town workers such as those in road constructions and those whose in public nature. Sanctorium was a tax in the amount of 3 reales. These were required for the cost of Christianization, including the construction of the churches and the purchase of materials for religious celebrations. Donativo was the tax in the amount of half real for the military campaign of the government against the Muslims. In the later years, however, the amount collected from Donativo was almost exclusively used for the Spanish fort in Zamboanga. Caja de Comunidad was a tax collected in the amount of 1 real for the incurred expenses of the town in the construction of roads, repair of bridges, or the improvement of public buildings. During Servicio Personal, Polo y Servicio is the system of forced labor which involved within the framework of the encomienda system introduced in the South American colonies by the conquistadores and Catholic priests who accompanied them. It was present in almost all the Spanish colonial government around the world. Polo y Servicio is the forced labor for 40 days of men ranging from 16 to 60 years of age who were obliged to give personal services to community projects. One could be exempted from polo by paying falla, or corruption of the Spanish falta, meaning absence, a daily fine of 1.5 real. So this is an illustration of cedula personal. There are several revolts that against the implementation of tax by the Spanish authorities. These are the revolts that against the implementation of tax. The Cagayan and Dingras revolts in 1589, Sumoroy's revolt, Maniagos revolt, and Malong's revolt. The Cagayan and Dingras revolts against the tribute occurred on Luzon in the present-day provinces of Cagayan and Ilocos Norte in 1589. Ilocanos, Ibanags, and other Filipinos revolted against alleged abuses by the tax collectors, including the collection of high taxes. It began when 6 tax collectors who had arrived from the Vigan were killed by the natives. Governor General Santiago de Vera sent Spanish and Filipino colonial troops to pacify the rebels. The rebels were eventually pardoned and the Philippine tax system reformed. In the town of Palapag today in northern Samar, Agustin Sumoroy, a Waray, and some of his followers rose in arms on June 1, 1649 over the Polo y Servicio, or forced labor, system being undertaken in Samar. This is known as the Sumoroy Revolt, named after Agustin Sumoroy. The government in Manila directed that all natives subject to the polo are not to be sent to places distant from their hometowns to do their forced labor. However, under orders of the various town alcaldes or mayors, the waray were being sent to the shipyards of Cavite to their polo y servicio, which sparked the revolt. The local parish priest of Palapag was murdered and the revolt eventually spread in Mindanao, Bicol, and the rest of the Visayas, especially in places such as Cebu, Masbate, Camiguin, Zamboanga, Albay, Camarines, and parts of northern Mindanao, such as Surigao. A rebel government was successfully established in the mountains of Samar. The defeat, capture, and execution of Somoray in June 1650 delivered a big setback to the revolt. His trusted co-conspirator David Dula sustained the quest for freedom with greater vigor, but in one of fierce battles several years later was wounded, captured, and later executed in Palapag, northern Samar by the Spaniards together with his 7K lieutenants. During Maniago's revolt, the fight soon began, and because the Spaniards were busy fighting against the Dutch, they were badly depleted by the Kapampangans. The Maniago revolt was the start of much bigger and even bloodier revolt in Pangasinan. This battle was led by a man named Andres Malong, who had heeded the call of Maniago to revolt against the Spaniards. The Maniago Revolt was an uprising in Pampanga during the 1660s, named after its leader, Francisco Maniago. During that time, Pampanga drew most of the attention from the Spanish religious orders because of its relative wealth. They also bore the burden of more tribute, forced labor, and rice exploitation. They were made to work for 8 months under unfair conditions and were not paid for their labor and for the rice purchased from them. Their patience was put to the limit, and they signified their intention to revolt by setting their campsite on fire. Andres Malong was the maestro de campo of Binalatongan, now San Carlos City, Pangasinan, in 1660s. He assisted many Spaniards in governing different towns in Pangasinan, and as such, had learned and was trained to use force and cruelty. He hoped for being the king of the province, however, set this plan aside when a war, led by Francisco Maniago, broke out in Pampanga. Malong started his campaign in a small barangay named Malungay, but failed. Having the same condition as in Pampanga, he led the people in Pangasinan to take up arms against the Spaniards. It spread like wildfire in Pangasinan. Because of his success, he proclaimed himself King of Pangasinan. During 1884, the tax was reformed. One of the good reforms which Spain introduced in the 19th century was the tax reform of 1884. As provided by the Royal Decree of March 6, 1884, this tax reform contained two important provisions. One is the abolition of heated tribute and its replacement of cedula tax. Number two is the reduction of the 40-day annual forced labor or the polo to 15 days. Cedula personales. Cedulas were first issued based on the Royal Decree on the March 6, 1884. All men and women residents of the island, Spaniards, foreigners, and natives who were over 18 years old were required to obtain a cedula. The only exceptions were the Chinese, who paid another poll tax, the remontados de infieles that were not subject to local administration, and the natives and colonies of the archipelago of Jolo and the islands of Balabac and Palawan. All in all, there were 16 different classes of cedulas. Originally, there were 9 classes tax. The rates of taxes range from 1.50 to 25 pesos, and the 10th grantees for priests, soldiers, and privileged classes. So now let's tackle the taxation during Marcos' administration. The appointment of Misael Vera as commissioner in 1965 led the Bureau to a new direction in tax administration. The most notable programs implemented were the Blue Master Program and the Voluntary Tax Compliance Program. The first program was adopted to curb the abuse of both the taxpayers and BIR personnel, while the second program was designed to encourage professionals in the private and government sectors to report their true income and pay the correct amount of taxes. It was also during Commissioner Rivera's administration that the country was further subdivided into 20 regional offices and 90 revenue district offices, in addition to the creation of various offices, which included the Internal Audit Department, replacing the Inspection of Department, Administrative Services Department, International Tax Affairs Staffs, and a Specific Tax Department, providing each taxpayer with a permanent tax account number or TAN. In 1970, not only facilitated the identification of taxpayers, but also resulted to faster verification of tax records. Similarly, the payment of taxes through banks per Executive Order number 206, as well as the implementation of the package audit investigation by the industry are considered to be important measures which contributed significantly to the improved collection of performance of the Bureau. The proclamation of martial law on September 21, 1972 marked the advent of the new society and ushered in a new approach in the developmental efforts of the government. Several tax amnesty decrees issued by the President were promulgated to enable erring taxpayers to start anew. Organization-wise, the Bureau had also undergone several changes during the martial law period 1972 to 1980. In 1976, under Commissioner Efren Plana's administration, the Bureau's national office transferred from the Finance Building in Manila to its own 12-story building in Quezon City, which was inaugurated on June 3, 1977. It was also in the same year that President Marcos promulgated the National Internal Venue Code of 1977, which updated the 1934 Tax Code. On August 1, 1980, the Bureau was further reorganized under the administration of Commissioner Ruben Anqueta. New offices were created and some organizational units were relocated for the purpose of making the Bureau more responsive to the needs of the tax-paying public. And now, let's tackle the taxation during Duterte administration. In his first few days in the Bureau, Commissioner Dulay ordered the streamlining of processes and requirements involving the BIR's frontline transactions, specifically the processing of tax clearance certificates and issuance of certificates authorizing registration. This was followed by the streamlining of the processes and requirements involving the BIR's registration processes. The filling of cases under the rate program and closure of erring businesses establishments, which include POGOs under the Oplan Candado program, were further intensified. Other tax enforcement activities such as post-evaluation of cash register machines or point of sale POS machines, inventory tax taking activities, and tax compliance verification drives were also conducted on a regular basis by the revenue district offices nationwide. It was during Commissioner Dulay's term that significant revisions on the tax laws were passed and implemented by the BIR through the issuance of revenue regulations and other revenue issuance. The first revision was made under the Tax Reform for Acceleration and Inclusion for Train Act per RA number 10963, which took effect on January 1, 2018. This was followed by the passage of Corporate Recovery and Tax Incentives for Enterprises or CREATE Act per RA number 11534, which took effect on April 11, 2021. A tax amnesty program or per RA number 11213 was also implemented, covering tax delinquencies and unpaid estate tax. With the passage of the new tax laws, Commissioner Dulay ordered the conduct of massive tax information dissemination activities using all available electronic media, tri-media, and social media. Amidst the challenge brought by the COVID-19 pandemic starting in 2020, the BIR pursued a digital transformation (RDX) program covering the automation of the Bureau's key internal and external processes. It was also during Commissioner Dulay's administration that the BIR has received a commendation from the House of Representatives for achieving an all-time high of 15.14% over its tax collection target for the fiscal year 2020. In House Resolution number 1538, it was stated that the BIR has exceeded its tax collection target for the fiscal year 2020, despite the crippling effect of the COVID-19 pandemic on the national economy. A total of 1.94 trillion pesos was collected by the BIR in 2020, exceeding its goal of 1.69 trillion pesos by 15%, or 255.19 billion pesos. The last time the BIR reached its goal was in 2001 and 2003. And that's the end of the discussion. I hope you learned.